I'm with you on that as well. Absolutely. Now, listen, all this week we are talking about the media when it comes to our life issues. And don't forget, you can hear the whole thing on Saturday night between 10 and 11. Duncan Williams is a journalist and ethical publisher. Formerly, he was a tabloid journalist. Some might even say he was a bit of a dirt digger. So he brings an interesting perspective then to what we should be, how we should be responding to the things that we see in our media every day. Steve Cox is the chair of the Church and Media Network, which works to help and support Christians who work in media and work in journalism and so on. And we talked in the second part of our conversation about the way in which we should respond to what's in the media and the pressures that there are on people, and Christians especially, working in media. Because Duncan made this point.
I think one of the tragedies that came out of the Leveson inquiry, without any shadow of doubt, is in fact they weren't going after the right targets. That the tragedy was, at the same time of the Leveson inquiry's findings, that we had Savile come out and various other celebrities who'd been doing things which were far, far worse than the stories that were digging around about celebrity tittle-tattle. And in fact, if the papers had been doing their job properly, meaning that they were actually ethically motivated, those stories would have been exposed, and not silly stories about celebrities' affairs and, Hollywood gossip. That's what I feel now in hindsight. And I wasn't in a position of being an editor, but if I were, those are the sort of stories that would warrant investigation in tabloid journalism.
And that, in a sense, is the rub in that, isn't it, Steve? Especially for Christians who are working in media, and for perhaps the church's perception of the media and as to whether or not you can be a Christian and work in the media. It is that fact that glaring issues that should have been the target of good investigative journalism that brought to light horrendous scandals where people were suffering in a real way as a direct result of it. Those things were a blind eye was turned, it appears, whereas salacious tittle-tattle that just looked to sort of, well, to titillate to the reader was what people were going after because it sells perhaps more easily.
Well, that's what the last bit you said then, because it sells more easily. We have to ask ourselves sometimes, what does humanity want? What is it which touches the very depths of humanity sometimes, which makes them buy that paper or turn that radio station on to listen to what Duncan was describing? And in some ways, as a church, we need to sort of get to the depth and the very heart of that and say, well, what is it which is lacking there? I would say that in my experience with the charity and with the people around our trustee board table, and many of them are actually in very senior positions in media, they try their best to do their best. They go into journalism actually to try to change things. Now, along the way, something might affect them doing that, but their heart is to bring about change and to influence. And it's very easy to criticize journalists, but most journalists do go into journalism for that reason. And it depends also on what you're buying. Different sort of tabloids, different sort of outlets will have a different policy. And I won't name him, but one of our trustees is actually one of the tabloid papers. And he's a passionate Christian, loves the Lord, but he's in a position where he's actually got to keep a check on all this stuff.
Yes.
And I asked him frequently, saying, how can you do that? How does it challenge your faith in that position you're in? And his answer is, he says, look, I just have to stand before God and make those decisions. And I'm responsible for those decisions, not God, he says. And I understood what he means by that, but he's still in a very challenging position.
And of course, it is the case, Duncan, that as we move more to, I mean, Steve points out there, different titles will have different policies. As we move into the digital sphere and the encouraging of more and more, and I think you're on record of saying you think it's a good thing that we will have some of these more local titles available on the, obviously that's what you're committed to at the minute, but as we do that, you end up then with a plethora of sites claiming to be news sites, some of which just blatantly have got nothing to do with good journalistic practice.
No, quite right. I mean, it's an interesting time because we've never, ever had such easy access to media as we've got today. So practically anybody can broadcast an opinion into the world. So credibility of source is so, so important. But from the same token, Paul, it's a healthy thing to have this rather than not, because grassroots opinion can often be very, very true. So it's using your common sense as a consumer, as a listener or a reader. Sometimes a report from Twitter that's of the local, that is again, hypothetical gas station has blown up or whatever's happened. Those immediate reports from people at grassroots level is actually are sometimes very, very true and very, very accurate to a degree that should be assigned to encourage social media as a means to communicate. Little videos that have been shot of incidents, or not always tragedies, but of pleasurable events as well, are often extremely helpful in making sure the truth is established correctly. Yeah. Say Hillsborough had camera phones, so Hillsborough being a true event that took place. What if the nightmare that people had to go through would have been stopped in its tracks because the truth would have got out at grassroots? People's ability to access the media would have been used to best effect.
So do you think that whilst it may be the case that a plethora of sites online gives us access to absolute drivel, it's also the case that it gives us access to a more egalitarian news service?
I think so. I think if we had the choice of whether or not to allow the internet not to be censored, in truth, it should not be censored. That's how I feel. I think it's the onus is on the listener and the consumer to use some common sense. If you don't like that source, don't go to it. If you don't like the Sun newspaper, as many people in Liverpool do not buy it. Use basically, it's absolving myself of responsibility. I know what I am picking up if it says on the tin what it does. If Christians want to listen to a Christian station, they tune into this station. They know
very wisely are to do so as well. Yes.
So you know to an extent what you get. If you want to go further afield, if you want something that's going, I mean, many people say the reason they buy the Sun is because the sports coverage is very good, and I have to agree, it is actually. The sports coverage in the Sun is very good. It's probably better than any other tabloid newspaper. However, you know very well that if you're going to want a sensible, unbiased political comment, going to the Sun isn't a sensible place to find it. Unless you're already of that conviction. If you've already got those views, then you want them bolstered and upheld by reading the Sun.
And of course, one of the things in this, Steve, is the influence that historically a very small number of people historically controlled phenomenal influence. And I'm not just talking about like Murdoch and so on. I mean, you go back through the generations and the influence that was held by the media barons, is that actually finally being broken by the availability, I mean, I called it egalitarian, but the availability of online opinion and journalistic perspective?
I would say yes, it is. Probably not completely, because there's still various, to quote, media barons who own quite a few things and control a vast number of media outlets. But social media has brought about that egalitarian approach, as you say, and I welcome it completely. Social media can be used for good and bad, and it's discerning that, isn't it, quite honestly? And I agree with Duncan, that social media, I think, has been a really healthy potential opportunity for the church as well. And the church mustn't run away from it. It must actually try to understand it, engage with it, but use it in a wise way. And the major thing with social media is content. The content still has to be good. Anywhere content has to be good, no matter what the channel of communication is. It just happens to be more immediate. Now, I would ask the question, what is media today? How do we define media? And I think we're at a point when we say that media is quite different, and it's moving at 100 miles an hour. It's changing at 100 miles an hour because of social media platforms. And I know we will talk about the church's response, or a Christian response, but as a church, I just think we need to embrace it, understand it, engage with it, and use it to share good news stories the best way we can.
But there is a danger, isn't there? And particularly with social media, if you get your news through your social media feeds, there is a danger that all that happens is you get your opinion reinforced.
Yeah.
Now, we could say on one level, you get your opinion reinforced anyway. If all you do is buy The Sun or all you do is buy The Guardian, you get your opinion reinforced anyway. But there's almost a sense in which now you are spoon-fed your opinion back to you and that justification of what you believe. Is that not an area of concern?
It is, but I would encourage people to sort of broaden their understanding of it. I actually do follow people I don't agree with because I actually want to hear what they say.
Oh, that's the reason you follow me. Oh,
Yeah, so, I'm sorry about that, Paul. Yeah. But I agree with everything you say, Paul, so it's all right. No, I agree. I understand what you mean by that, but we've got to be a bit more broad in our understanding of what is happening. We put on a church media conference a few years ago and invited someone very, very contentious to it, who I won't name. And this particular person provoked a reaction in people. Some said they will come, some said people they wouldn't come because that person was there. But I felt it was important that she was there. Oh, I said she. And she was there because...
So we both knew who you were talking about, Katie.
I saw that look in your eye. But it was interesting because it was necessary to hear where she came from so we could actually challenge her. And it was an interesting, it was a subject about offence. And getting back to social media, how social media can be used to offend so many people.
Yes.
And this particular person does it very well. But we wanted to ask her, why do you do that? What's the heart behind that? So from that point of view, yes, you're right to say you've got to identify the source. And there are ways of actually identifying the source. And Duncan would agree, you can actually find out the source of where things come from without too much difficulty. You know, if someone is sitting in their back room putting out fake news from somewhere, they're not going to go out and interview many people. So you can almost check, you know, what's the balance in their comments. You can almost check what photos they're going to use. And if it's something you can Google and find it's been used in a lot of other reports, then you realise there's something not quite right about this particular article being issued on social media. There are ways of identifying, and I think we need to be a bit more savvy about it.
And the responsibility has to sit with us there, doesn't it? To be more savvy about it. That was Steve Cox from the Church and Media Network, who, along with Duncan Williams, is my guest this week for Life Issues. We're talking about the media and how we, as people of faith, should relate to the media. How should Christians react to the things that are written in our papers? And why is it that so many Christians do treat the daily whatever as the fifth gospel? It's not. It's the Bible we should be building ourselves on, isn't it? Wonder what you think. 08456 300 400 to get in touch and share your perspective. We'll have more on this from Duncan and Steve tomorrow. And, of course, the whole thing will be available to you Saturday night between 10 and 11.
You're listening to UCB One.
The church is made up of a whole variety of people, male and female, young and old, introvert and